Hello, and welcome to the Everyday Business Problems Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Chrysler. Each episode, we talk to business leaders and subject matter experts to learn about the challenges they've overcome and the challenges they still face. You'll hear fresh insights, real talk, and get inspiration to grow your business. Hey, everybody, and thanks for joining me on another episode of the Everyday Business Problems Podcast. Today, we welcome Jeannette Seibly, an award-winning talent advisor, leadership results coach, and business author. Whew, gotta spit that out. Specializes in delivering innovative solutions for hiring, coaching, and leadership challenges. Over the past 32 years, she has empowered business owners, bosses, and leaders in manufacturing and beyond to achieve remarkable success. With a steadfast commitment to excellence, Jeannette champions those eager to elevate, expand, and excel in their results. Jeannette, so excited to welcome you to the Everyday Business Problems Podcast.
Me too. It's always great to get back to my Michigan connections.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I'm excited about this topic too. We're gonna dive into this phenomenon, and I don't think it's a new phenomenon, but I think it's going to be having a resurgence, which is boomerang employees, and talking through some process around what it's like to rehire these folks, talking maybe a little bit about the risks that go along with that, and potentially the rewards of of going along with that. So yeah, I'm excited to jump into this with you.
Great. I mean, right now there's 35% of new hires are boomerangs, and that's like an all-time high.
That's incredible.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's incredible. What do you think is one of the primary drivers behind that? Do you think it's market conditions? Do you think it's, just folks that maybe overshot their hiring to begin with? What do you think, is some of the primary drivers behind it?
Well, I think for the most part, it's considered to be low risk and it's a high speed solution. Like they've been here at one time, they did the job. I don't have the time right now. I don't have the money. I can't find the right workers. People I talk to ghost me. So here's Joe or Sally, and they're willing to come back and do the work. Just bring them on back. But unfortunately, there are risks to doing that as well.
Yeah. What do you find with the folks that you end up talking to, in that vein around, this kind of risk tolerance? Are these folks that typically have a, kind of very well defined, like from an HR perspective? Do they have a well defined process for hiring and onboarding? Are these folks that have gone through typically a lot of performance evaluations and they have a lot of documentation? Or, are the conversations you kind of get in with some of these folks, are they really, stretched so thin that they're kind of, they're willing to expand their risk tolerance, let's say? I'd love to just unpack kind of a bit around that, in
Those are
terms
great
of, the
questions.
stuff, the stuff that you've seen, and, and how people should be thinking about this stuff.
Well, I would to answer the first part of your question, I would say all the above. So
Yeah.
you have well-defined HR policies that people actually follow, and then you have well-defined policies that people ignore, and then you have the vice versa, where they don't have a well-defined policy, and so they make it up as they go along. Regardless, it's very, very, very important that people take the time to follow a policy, follow a system to make sure that who they're bringing back is the person that they remember. Because our memories, I know everyone thinks they have a great memory. They really don't. They really, really don't. And, the person comes back, and after a couple days or a couple weeks, they go, "Oh yeah, that's why they left." Okay. And sometimes it's very simple to get on the same page, but so many people just don't take that time. They go, "I don't have the time to do that."
Yeah.
Well, quite frankly, you don't not have the time to do that. And so that's critical.
Yeah. I really love that because, to your point, right? Sometimes we forget about those seemingly insignificant details until our memory gets jogged very quickly. So yeah, I like that. Maybe you could talk a little bit about, as we start to, so obviously that's the problem statement, right? Like how do you navigate all of this stuff, right? So maybe we start at the beginning of that, talking through, um, like a strategic job fit analysis, some sort, like how do we start to define these things to begin with, so we can ultimately circle back and utilize that as a tool in this selection process, right? Because regardless of if there exist previous employees or not, we're still looking at fit analysis, right? Like people selection. What skill sets do we need? What types of you know um skill sets and kind of emotional parts of that puzzle. So maybe talk a little bit about that, what you've seen from your experience.
Well, in my experience, and as an author, I've written a third edition of Hire Amazing Employees, and it's a practical guide from start to finish. Um, my book is here somewhere. Start to finish, um, on how to set up a strategic hiring system. Too often we just say, well, I want who I had before. Or I want, and they think they know what that person was doing. But bosses today are just way too busy to know exactly everything that their employee was doing or was not doing. And of course, if a customer screams, "Hey, this isn't fitting. You need to rework this. The quality isn't what it used to be. My orders are late. You promised X. I'm not even getting them till Z." Sometimes you don't see what's going on behind the scenes that is actually getting in the way. So when you put together a strategic job fit system, it's really important to get into exactly what are the qualifications that you're looking for. What are they going to do 80% of the day? And then make sure that if you need somebody who's got an eye for quality, that that's who you're looking for. Do they have that experience? Do they know what a widget looks like? Do they know the various components? Do they know how to run the machines? Sometimes people like to speed them up or slow them down.
Yeah.
That can really get in the way of quality. So, really being clear as to what you need, what you want is critical. That's the first part. And it doesn't have to be a formal job description, and HR people don't listen to me when I say that. I've been there in HR, but too often, we think it's got to be a really formal job description. No, just write down exactly what it is you need. You can modify it into a formal format later.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. One of the things, like as you were talking about that, I think sometimes, and again, it's all based on experience, right? So sometimes I think when we hear these types of things, it's, whether it's from the kind of boss or ownership or leader perspective, or it's, more on the HR side of things, sometimes we hear what you're talking about and say like, oh, it is, the job description. Oh, it is the SOPs. And there's so many, what I was trying to set up there is, right, like there's all these soft skills to consider. There's more that goes into it, looking for that right fit,
Yeah.
than, right, just like what's on the formalized SOPs or job description. And one of the things I like to tell people is, very simply, and to your point, it's like, what does success look like? Because most leadership folks know what that is, right? And they can say it in plain English. So it's like, well, what does success look like? At the end of the day, how do I know if I move forward, stayed in the same spot, or moving backwards? And if we can just get to that plain language, spot, right? I find that a lot of people become much more successful because
They do.
they now understand what the goal is.
And to follow up on that point, I mean, this is really good. People can define what success means to them and what they want this person, whether it be an executive, a manager, a
Yeah.
supervisor, an hourly, doesn't a high-low driver. They can define that for you. The problem is asking the right questions to uncover, is the person blowing smoke or are they being talking straight?
Yeah.
Because there's people who say, sure, I can create a lot of policies and procedures. Well, that doesn't mean you're going to follow them. Or
Yeah.
sure, I can follow them. Doesn't mean you can create them. So you
Yeah.
have to be really, really clear what part of it that you really need and want.
Yeah, it's a great point. I see that a lot in, you know, delegation, right? You see that a lot. It's like, oh, well, I can't give this to so and so because it never gets done.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, does it never get done? Was it not defined well to begin with? Or to your point, is, you know, it a lot of smoke and mirrors and there's no real meat, you know, and or movement towards, you know, again, what the goal of that
Yeah.
particular thing is. So yeah, I like that. And again, it's all stuff to be mindful of as you're starting to build you know, build the system, build these processes around there. What's kind of, you know, beyond the macro of, you know, building the system, like what's the building blocks of that? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that from, you know, the assessment perspective, or what are some of the building blocks that folks can utilize to start thinking through this.
Well, there's a couple of primary tools, and I think most people are familiar with them. If they have an applicant tracking system, or also known as an ATS, making sure that that system works for them. Sometimes what they put in the system or what the vendor puts in for the system, like keywords, really don't fit. I mean, not everybody needs to have a master's degree or a
Yeah.
bachelor's degree or even an associate's degree to do their work. So it's really important that people are really clear and they're looking for experience, but they're looking for experience in the way of, have you actually been there, done that?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people today can talk about stuff, but they can't really go in and say, yes, this is exactly how you do it. This is exactly how you build it. The other piece that trips people up are assessments. Now, there's a couple different assessments that would be used inside of a manufacturing organization, production, or anything of that nature, those types of companies, industrial base, is that an honesty integrity is really, really important. It's too easy for things to walk out the back door or for data to get sort of downloaded somewhere it shouldn't. A lot of things like that go on. I've seen a lot of executives, white collar as well as blue collar, or what we used to call pink collar for the women, just saying what it used to be called. But white collar crime is actually on the increase, which surprises a lot of people. So it's important that that is looked at from an honesty, integrity, and looking at the core value. But what you really, really want there is direct admission, not what's their favorite color. Oh, it's red. Oh, they're an angry person. Well, no, maybe they just love red. Red does
Yeah.
not necessarily mean you're an angry person. So it's making sure that what you believe you're assessing for is what you're assessing for and what you want to do there, because not all assessments are created equal. In fact, many of them are not. There's a science behind assessments, there's a legality behind assessments. So what you want to do is make sure that you've seen the technical manual to make sure that you know exactly what it's being assessed for. The other piece of this, particularly for a supervisory level and above, would be a job fit assessment. It's looking at their core values, it's looking at their thinking style, it's looking at their occupational interests. I had a client one time that was having a hard time finding maintenance people and refused to use the job fit. They used the honesty integrity, so we knew who we were getting from an ethical standpoint.
Yeah.
And by the way, that does not replace a background check, but it does help decrease the number of background checks you need to run or a drug test. But with the job fit, I finally said, just use it. I mean, there's an interesting, if they don't have a high interest in mechanics, guess what? they're not going to do the job in a
Yeah.
mechanical, environment. So they did that. They used also a skill test. When they started doing that, it was like night and day, literally. They had good quality people that they were hiring instead of getting caught up. Well, he spoke this way, or, he's had a couple different jobs in the last 5 years. It's like, know what they are and then have a really good conversation. And so they did that. They said, I need you to stay for at least 1 year. No problem. The guy stayed for a year and a half and was one of the best employees ever. But it took forever for us to get him hired because of all the hoops we had to go through because of a lot of stereotypes and biases that we were having to deal with the owner.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much good stuff in what you just unpacked there. I mean, everything back to the ATS, how that gets set up. Again, it's like many tools, right? The configuration and implementation, dictate a lot of the success of the tool, and the ATS is no different in that situation. So I'm glad that you brought that up. And I like the thought process around the different assessments and ultimately how you can utilize them, collectively, right? To kind of again build this picture, paint a picture of the folks that you're going through this process with. What I'm curious to get your feedback on is, at what point do you recommend folks like on the employer side move to some of these assessments? Is this the short list? Is this at the initial interview stages? Where do you find these tools ultimately provide the most benefit? In this situation.
Well, as you know, for many manufacturers, speed, just in time, all that stuff is critical. They don't have time to go through a long, laborious process of 20 different interviews and hearing this and that. So, what I would do as part of the ATS system, I would incorporate the honesty, integrity. If the person looks like they have the skills on paper, look and see if that looks good, because there's a scale, at least the ones that I sell, there's a scale, and then have your interviews. In my book, I also provide a phone interview. A phone interview can be very, very critical because it's a short period of
Yeah.
time. You get through this is the job. Tell me specifically what experience you've had, anything else like that, and then you move forward. Now, there are some new laws out there, like you can't ask, well, what were they making? What was your wage before? You cannot, some states you cannot ask that anymore. So there's certain things you got to be aware of so that you work around that so that this job is an 8 hour a day, or this job's a 12-hour day for 4 days a week, and then you got 3 days off, or this is the night shift. Being straight up front helps you to weed through whether or not that's going to work. Then for your supervisory and above, I would again use the job fit. That can be used before you then do the full, you know, interview of going from there. Because
Yeah.
at that point, do they have that interest in mechanics if that's part of the job? Do they have the interest in finance? We found a lot of people working with financial groups or technology companies. It's just
Yeah.
has been really weird for me is that the interest, these people want to work in these companies, but they have no interest, none. And it's like, well, why do you want to do this? Well, it looks good on paper.
Yeah.
I mean, I worked with a guy like that one time, and he said, you know, that's what my mom and dad wanted me to do. And I thought, okay, good. But, you're in your 30s.
Yeah.
It's a good time to maybe think for yourself. But, people do what they do. Just because you have the skill doesn't mean that you enjoy doing it or you know how to use it effectively.
Yeah.
And I think that that's critical. I've known several different companies that have hired CFOs or controllers for their companies. The person's interest in finance was at the bottom. And later the president said to me, he goes, now I know I cannot get my P&Ls on time. Or when I
Yeah.
do get them, I can't read them. So, I mean, there's things like that that go on. And it's a matter of getting real about what do you need? That's their job description. Now put together your system, keep it simple so that you'll follow it, but have some basic tools. So you've got your ATS, you've got your assessments, you've got your background checks are critical,
Yeah.
really, really important. The job offer letter or however you're processing that, and then the onboarding. But I think I'm getting a little ahead of myself here because I think we're going to talk about this in a few minutes. So,
Yeah. No, it's all great though. And I think to that point, right? Even back to what you mentioned about utilizing, kind of each touch point in a meaningful way, right? Like how do we make
yes.
these things effective where, I think back to even all the, kind of hiring decisions and things that I've been involved in personally throughout, my career. And again, there's no manual for it. So a lot of this stuff is, tribal knowledge and passed down wisdom and experience. But just the little, tip that you had in there in terms of like utilizing the phone interview in a much more effective manner. And again, thinking through how do you identify those transferable skills if it's somebody
Yeah.
maybe looking at or contemplating a new role, that whole job assessment piece of it. And again, kind of connecting this back to, the boomerang hire thought process. you know this might be somebody that you're considering for a different division, a different role. You kind of have a bit of comfort with them because they worked there previously. Maybe it's not a direct plug in to where they were at before. So these tools still become a meaningful part of that process, regardless of it's, a boomerang or if it's, somebody that you're seeking new. So I really, really like that part of it.
Well, I think it's a great point because you should not treat a boomerang any different than a brand new employee.
Yeah.
You really should not, particularly the longer the period of time since they've worked there. There's times that they may have created some mischief. So now you've
Yeah.
got something else going on that you may not even, a lot of people are unaware of stuff that people have done. It may be that they um, got fired. Again, they're not going to come right out and tell you that. Or they had a bad experience or a good experience. Maybe they had a really good experience and they found out, but this just isn't the right job for me. And that's why they want to come back. Because sometimes people think they know what will make them happy in the job. But unfortunately, according to Gallup, over 80% of people are in jobs that don't fit them. And a
Yeah.
lot of employers don't use objective data to make sure that who these people say they are is who they really are. And then they don't take the time to set up the what we call the job match patterns to ensure that yes, this person here says they can sell. They can sell our machinery. Well, can they? If they don't have an interest in machinery and they don't have an interest in sales and they're not high
It's gonna
enough
be
on
tough.
assertive, and you're expecting them to go out knocking on doors, I assure you that they'll keep that desk really neat
Yeah.
because they'll be sitting there a lot
Yeah.
looking for something to do. And I've unfortunately seen that happen. So again, it's, particularly right now where, our margins are so low. I think it's really, really, really important that we improve our process of hiring because you have three key places that you can impact your employees: the hiring, the training and coaching, or when you fire them. The less expensive is the hiring, and that includes your boomerangs because just because they worked there before doesn't mean they're going to fit today.
Yeah.
Things change.
Yeah, I think that's so important because again, there's obviously variability and, a bunch of differences between could be to your point, timing, could be, reason that they left, reason they're interested in coming back. But I think what you said in there in terms of treating these folks very similar to a brand new hire because again, regardless of the time that has elapsed, there is a period of time that you don't know what has happened,
Yeah.
right? And so, even if this was a stellar, outstanding, all-star team member that left for a promotion and or an increase in responsibility or salary, and now they're coming back again, whether it was, a week, a month, 10 years, you don't know who's coming back. You know who you used to have. And so
Right.
putting them through these same processes and again, creating the system for these things is what's going to ultimately ensure that you're not just cycling back through this person, you know, for a completely different reason potentially, right? So
Right.
really investing the resources to build these systems and tool sets out. And again, I love the keep it simple because I think oftentimes we overcomplicate these types of things, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally.
And sometimes we just don't know any better. It's like,
Yeah.
well, it said we
Yeah.
had to do XYZ. Well, you don't have to
Yeah.
do it for an hour. You can do that within a minute.
Yeah.
Particularly if you have the right tools in place. Like if you have the right tools, and that's critical. I mean, there's over
Yeah.
3,000 publishers of assessments out there. And it's like, oh my goodness, how do I make sure I select the right one? Well, you talk to someone like myself who's an expert and you get the technical manual.
Yeah. Well, it's like all things, lots of tools work. If you know how to configure and implement them.
If they're
So
the quality, you got to have quality first, though. I mean,
yes.
not there's only a handful of tools, to be honest, that are qualified under the Department of Labor guidelines for pre-employment use. A lot of people, particularly a good salesperson, will tell you whatever they want. Oh, we got a letter
Yeah.
here from our attorney, yada yada.
Yeah.
But that doesn't get you into the actual specs of the science of can they really be used for a pre-employment purpose. Sure, they can be used after they've hired them, but by
Yeah.
then they're hired. It's a little late at that time to say, oops.
Yeah. Well, it makes total sense. And, again, like I was equating it back to a lot of the things that I see, especially from a technology implementation perspective. I mean, you can take that same example in, an ERP environment where, a really great SaaS salesperson, yeah, of course we can, execute this process. Of course we can do these different things. And lo and behold, once a commitment is made and, the configuration and implementation happens, it's kind of like, well, what about this? Well, we really don't have a, particular, solution for that thing, right? So yeah, again, it's always buyer beware, but it comes back to the experience that,
Yeah.
having seen these things, right? And on your side from the assessment perspective, having seen these tools and what works and doesn't work, it's easy to spot and easy to recommend the things that do work and back that up in terms of why they work, right?
Yeah.
Same
I'm
thing.
sitting over here grinning because we will actually spend more time buying a piece of machinery than we will in hiring somebody.
Yeah,
And
100%.
part of it is we just don't know, and we don't know that we don't know, or we think we know. But people are people. They're going to do what they do. And that's why it's really, really important that you have a system, you have the right tools, and then you have a conversation.
Yeah.
You've done your due diligence, you've looked at their former performance appraisals, you've talked with people that used to work with them, but you have a conversation, like go through the interview process as outlined here in the book, and then also have additional conversations, particularly if we're talking another manager or executive level, to make sure that the first couple of times they weren't just telling you what you want to hear, because a lot of times people can be really good at that, particularly if they have a lot of experience or in sales. They're really good at selling themselves, but then doesn't mean that they have the interest in selling your product or service.
Yeah. One of the things I'm curious to get your take on is, specific to the Boomerang employees, or the potential of rehiring them. When it comes to kind of that final set of interviews, and again, depending on level and all of those things, right? But are you thinking through this? How are you coaching folks to think through that interview process? Because I would imagine that the comfort of knowing somebody, you maybe aren't going to ask as many or as detailed or as pointed of a question, perhaps, because there's already that comfort level built in. So I'm curious, like, how do you, what's your recommendation around that? Do you have a specific series of questions as it pertains to the boomerang folks, or do you really try to kind of go across the board to give you that perspective between, because you could be between somebody brand new and between a boomerang, right?
Right. Well, I actually went through this with a client a couple years ago where they had spent 6 months talking with this person. And really, one of the people, as part of the hiring team, had actually worked with him before, liked him, that kind of thing. And they used an assessment that wasn't designed to be used for pre employment purposes. And even that tool came up with red flags. So they said, Jeanette, would you interview him? I said, well, if I do that, we're going to use the assessment that I use because it's one of the top tools in the market today. And so we did, and I could see exactly why. It's like, okay, from a sales perspective, the guy would be brilliant, but he was being hired to manage salespeople. In that case, he wouldn't be so good.
Yeah.
So bringing in a third party like myself or somebody else, and what I do is I use the questions that are in the assessment and just have a straight conversation with them. It's not my decision whether they get hired or not. But in this particular case, they also did their reference checks, which again are in the book. I actually provide the questions that are, that would work. And of the four references that were done, two came back positive and two said absolutely not. So again, it's one of those things where it's a process.
Yeah.
And if you follow the process, you trust the process, you bring in a third party that you value, who knows what he or she is doing, who've been interviewing for a long time, and isn't just relying on their feelings about it, but really getting
Yeah.
into tell me more about yourself, and they're listening for what's going on here. In this case, he was just all over the place
Yeah.
and would not have been a good manager. But that's what they want. That's what they needed. They didn't need another sales rep. And too
Well,
often, that's what happens, particularly in sales. I don't care what company you're in. They take their best salesperson, they promote that person, him or she to a management position, and then that's that. I mean, I
yeah.
heard a story ages ago where the company took their number one sales rep, which was a woman. She was number one, but she'd been complaining about the customer service people. So they made her manager of sales so she could impact customer service. Well,
I love
after
it.
3 months, they had to let her go, and she already had her foot out the door anyway.
Yeah.
But the sad part here, and this is what's going to happen if people aren't paying attention, she took a third of the customers with her.
Yeah.
And you can say, well, I have a non-compete. Well, yeah, you might think you do, but a lot of those are up, caught up in employment law,
Yeah.
depending again where you're
Well,
at and
that's
stuff.
yeah.
But if
There's
the
a
client says they don't want to work with you anymore, they don't want to work with you anymore, and they don't have to. So
that's
something to keep in mind.
Well, it's a great point, a touch off topic, but for the folks that are out there and listening, right? There's a huge difference between a judgment and collection, right? There's a big difference when you have customers that say, "I don't want to do business with XYZ company. I like Dave, I like Jeanette. I'm going to do business with the people that I like." And legal standing or otherwise, when people tell you that, sure, you can fight it, right? But there's going to be mud on your face. And, I like ending on that note for this particular spot, because I think what you said in there is key, where a lot of times, regardless of what we're talking about, right, we kind of rely on our gut. We use a lot more feelings than facts,
Yep.
because we're people, we're emotional, right, and we're
Yep.
relationship based. And so I think looking at this process, building this system, and looking for those data points, utilizing external resources, utilizing, what's available to do that, gets us to a much clearer picture of who is a good fit, based on job fit analysis, based on, doing some of these assessments, based on conversations as well, right? It's not one part of it. It's the collective that makes these systems valuable, and not just valuable for the immediate, right, but valuable for the long term, right? I mean,
Right.
if there's an exit somewhere in your future, having a system like this for vetting, hiring, and onboarding, probably going to add a little bit of value to your business.
Well, absolutely right. And then after you've been having those conversations and got really clear about sharing with them what you expect, what you need, and not sugarcoating it, like
Yeah.
being talking straight, finding out what they're looking for and what do they need, what can you provide? Because sometimes it's like, well, I need to have this experience. Well, that's great. But unfortunately, the likelihood of that happening isn't going to happen for a couple of years. Well,
Right.
now you're talking straight. And so the person who you're looking at bringing back from, like, as a boomerang, you go, let's just part good friends. Because having a positive relationship is much more valuable than, bringing somebody on and then having to let them go because they keep reminding you of your promise. And I think that's where a lot of
Yeah.
people, a lot of employers get themselves in trouble. And that takes us into the job offer is be really responsible for if you make promises, put it in writing, put it in writing, put it in writing, and then honor it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times, particularly if it's a relo, or we'll give you a pay increase because you're bringing them in at a lower pay rate for whatever reason. And oh, we'll look at you again in 3 months, and oh, we don't have the money. It doesn't go over real well.
Yeah.
Doesn't go over real well.
Yeah, we I'll say collectively as leaders, can get ourselves into trouble. Always, I'll say 99 times out of 100 good intentions, right? But
Yeah.
when it's not followed up upon or actioned, it really creates a turbulent mess. And generally not just for those specific individuals, right? There's big ripples depending on the size and structure of your organization, and I've seen that. I've seen the special treatment, and the ripple that creates when folks don't have the full understanding, and that's the stuff that ultimately you end up then having to navigate instead of being focused on how else to grow your business.
Well,
So
and sometimes, people, bosses are busy. They've just got so many different things that they have to juggle and they have to do. They may not be paying attention to what they're saying. And that happens a
yeah,
lot, whether you like it or not, folks that are listening. Some of you need to tune up that listening a bit. But yeah, particularly when you're making promises. So again, get it in writing, put it in writing, but again, it's also the boomerang or the new hire's responsibility as well to make sure that if that promise was made and if it was important, that they bring it to your attention if it gets overlooked. So it is a
yeah,
two-way street, but the kinder you can be up front can make a bigger difference as you go through. And
yeah,
then probably the biggest area that people get themselves in trouble with in the job offer is sometimes these boomerangs, because they can, because they have a relationship with you, can come in to get the job, but then they use what you offer them as a negotiating tool for a different job. And so then you find yourself in a bidding war. My counsel is don't get into a bidding war. Even if you win, that win may only last about six
yeah,
months.
yeah. Short term. Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought of that aspect of it. The one thing that I was going to add prior to that for folks that are out there, was just this, back to the putting it in writing. I think sometimes
Yeah.
on the candidate side, people maybe think, oh, that's too forward. I'm, kind of, creating waves. And what I say, because I get into, I have a lot of conversations with folks in transition, and what I say is like, hey, that's a really great sign of a company that you might want to take a second look at, you know, because if you're asking for something in writing that's been agreed to, right, and you're doing it in a very, diplomatic way, right, you're not pounding on the desk type of a scenario, right? And you're getting pushback for that. That should be a bit of a cause you a bit of a pause,
It's
right?
called a red
So as
flag.
yeah, as much as you may need this, right? So I want to be mindful, right? Like it's on both sides. And
Yes.
I think your point afterwards is well taken as well, right? That it's not always the employer that is the egregious party. Sometimes it is the candidates that are leveraging these things and ultimately using it to springboard into a more lucrative or what they deem a better offer. So yeah, it's on both sides
It
of
is.
the table.
And then the
um
last part that
yeah,
most people overlook, onboarding. Onboarding. In fact, in my book, chapter 6, it's I have what's called a 180-day success plan. Take the time to put together how you're going to reincorporate them, because we're talking boomerangs here, just as you would a brand new person, reincorporate them into this is how we do business today.
yeah,
These are the unwritten rules today that may not have been there before, or
yeah,
that in the past you had this unwritten rule. Well, guess what? Now we have it in writing. So make sure that they understand it, they understand the metrics, the expectations, but include the training and development. Particularly today, from the human side, is a lot of people like say they haven't been within a company in say 10 years. There's much more emphasis today on the human side, on emotional intelligence, on emotional integrity, on kindness, on your word choice, on microaggressions and biases. I mean, I could go on, and your
yeah,
head's probably already spinning, going, "Oh gosh." However, if they're being brought in, and that's part of what's required, do not allow a boomerang to talk you out of mandating that they take the same classes and participate as anybody else, because
yeah,
things do change. Even if it's only 6 months,
yeah,
things can change, cultures can start to shift. It just takes one new person that things can start to shift.
yeah. No, it's solid advice. And again, back to, kind of the both sides of the table, right? Like that should be if somebody is, even if they're a boomerang and somebody's giving you pushback on participating in those things, that should be a red flag, right? Like that should be, a warning signal to you because again, things can change, sometimes week to week. So,
They can.
chances are this is going to be somebody that hasn't been with you in at least a month, if not longer. So again, you're
Yeah.
spot on with having folks go back through that, be integrated again. Even if it's in a similar role or could be even the exact same role,
Yeah.
I would almost guarantee that something has changed about it. Right? Maybe the
Or maybe they were
inputs
at a
changed.
supervisory level. Now they're
Yeah,
coming in a manager or director level. It's going to be
could
even
be any
more
of those things. Sure.
critical that they're reindoctrinated along with everybody else. Plus, during that process, relationships get built.
Yeah.
And working relationships are critical today. They're critical today. They're critical today. So it's
Yeah.
important that that happen. And I remember, it's in fact, it's a story in my book. There was a situation where a boss says, "Well, I'm too busy." They interviewed somebody. They didn't go through the stuff that we were just talking about. They hired the person, and instead of having an onboarding process, they just said, "Just ask me what you need to do, and I'll tell you." But the boss never had the time to tell her, or to train her, or to do anything that had been
Right.
mentioned. And so
Right.
3 months later, the person who'd been hired from a job was fired.
Uh,
And here was a really forward thinking company. So the director was talking with his VP, And he was coming up with all these excuses as to why the person didn't work out. And he said, we're all busy. It's your job. Your number one job is to ensure that our employees are successful.
Yeah.
And if this keeps happening, and if it happens again, because it had been happening, I may have to let you go. So now a lot of companies would go, whoa, wait a minute, but this is a good boss. Well, that may be, but if they're constantly firefighting, how good of a boss are they really? And why are they not developing their people to take on some of those roles?
Yep. Yeah. Oh, I love it. Well, Jeannette, this has been a great conversation. Are there any other things that maybe we didn't cover, kind of parting thought that you might have in terms of something we might not have covered that you want to get out to the folks that are listening?
I think we've done a great job of covering a lot of things. I think for those people who are still on the fence, do a cost analysis. A lot of companies today do not have a line item that says the cost of a hiring mistake or the cost of workers' comp. Well, a lot of people might have that, or unemployment. If you are doing a good job, a lot of those numbers will actually decrease. Your profits will increase. But first, you got to know where you're at. And I think that's really important, particularly for those of you who may say, well, but it costs money to use those tools. Yeah, but if I save you one bad hire, just one bad hire, I've more than paid for it.
Yeah, that's a great starting place, and I would venture a guess that not many folks know that number off the top of their head.
I'm sure they don't.
So, yeah, that's great advice. For anybody that's out there that wants to connect with you, where's a great place for them to find you at?
So you can go to my website, Seibco, that's S as in Sam, EI, B as in boy, C as in cat, O as in octopus.com.
Perfect. And I'll make sure to put that in the show notes for folks that are out there. And
then the book, you can get this on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or any indie bookstore, or go to my website and go to the book tab, and it'll give you different locations where you can go get the book. In fact, I would get the book, and I'd get if you want more than one, you might want to call me and say, Jeannette, I need all my managers trained on how to hire. I'll give you a discount on the books.
I love it. Perfect. Well, very cool. Jeannette, thanks so much for coming on the Everyday Business Problems podcast.
Thank you. This has been enjoyable.
Thank you so much for listening today. If we brought you any value, please rate, subscribe, and share our podcast. Also, be sure to connect with us on social media by searching @The Chrysler Club. Until next week, I'm your host, Dave Chrysler.